Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, our New Year special. Today, we are focusing on the challenges and opportunities of global governance today, as China puts forward the Global Governance Initiative to the international community. First, voices coming from the United Nations. Over the decades, the UN has gathered the most countries together with the hope to take on common problems and to find shared solutions. How much does the UN platform still matter today in a more fragmented world? I have had a series of in-depth interviews with leading voices coming from the United Nations. What do you consider, Mr. Secretary General, that can be some of the ideas that you can work with those national leaders? What kind of opportunity does it present?
Well, a few things are essential. Discussing about reform of the international financial system is an area where I believe the Chinese government is also deeply interested. To have a UN role in the global governance of artificial intelligence. The idea that artificial intelligence should not be for the club of the rich countries. It needs to be something for all countries in the world. And it's not by chance that China presented to the General Assembly of the United Nations a resolution that was approved unanimously for capacity building in developing countries. We must make sure that artificial intelligence is for all, not only for the rich. Any emergency platform that we would like to discuss in order to give us more conditions in the future when there are future pandemics to respond more effectively. A new agenda for peace, betting a lot on the root causes of peace. Development is an essential instrument to consolidate peace. But there are many other areas in the new agenda for peace. On the other hand, an enormous effort in order to create the conditions for developing countries to have access to the resources they need to implement the Sustainable Development Goals.
We see as the world changes, there are different ideas as to how the earlier rules can be abided by and whether there can be updates of the global rules. But at the same time, more self-interest as well. For example, about this, what you consider as a very crucial energy transition. We see different governments are having very different decisions, and sometimes the pace of movement can be delayed by one country's national interest, while their consensus can be harder to be reached. Mr. Secretary General, how optimistic do you have to be in your daily work?
Jean Monnet used to say he was not optimistic nor pessimistic, he was determined.
Okay.
And I'm determined to convince all governments that the most important national interest is to defeat climate change. I was in Shanghai. The secretary of the party in Shanghai was explaining to me that meaningful investment is already being made to protect in relation to the rising sea level. When I was in the Pacific, the rising sea level was a major concern. I saw communities that had to move from the coast further inland, with destruction taking place at coastal areas. Some islands might even disappear. I mean, we are facing climate change as the existential threat of our time, and the interest, the national interest of each country is to make sure we defeat climate change and we do not let our planet to be destroyed.
Mr. Secretary General, you see China has been confirming the reform and opening policy. Meanwhile, you also see this country has been working with the United Nations. How do you see the importance of continued success of this, what it considers as the largest developing country in the world? How much do you see the takeaways of China can be of reference to the global South?
Now, China was able to eradicate extreme poverty. China is still a developing country, but China is in the top performance of some of the most sophisticated areas of technology. And so I believe that to study what China has done, to learn with the Chinese process, is something that will be very important. Of course, no one size fits all. Countries are different. But it's an experience that all developing countries should study to see to what extent they can profit from that experience to overcome their dramatic development gaps. this should represent a moment of deep commitment of China, a renewed deep commitment of China with multilateralism and with the UN, which represents two traditional ways of China to assert itself in the world.
DESA has put out the World Social Report every year. If I remember right, sir, in your latest report, there is suggestion that people all over the world are losing confidence in their governments, according to some latest surveys collected worldwide. Mm-hmm. One could also argue there has been increasing sentiment about lack of trust for the UN because actions have not necessarily been delivered on some of the crucial issues. When you are suggesting you are a true believer of multilateralism, does multilateralism really lead to solutions? That's really the question, isn't it?
The trust placed on the public institutions among the general public, especially among the youth, is declining. That's a very alarming signal, alarming trend. But we have to ask why. Then to me, to DESA, to my team, we conducted an enormous survey, conducted an enormous engagement with the youth organization, with the youth representatives, and then also with the other institutions. To me, that I think there are a number of factors contributing to this declining trust on the public institutions. But we have to acknowledge that the expectations is such a high, but with regard to the implementation of the global commitment and the global plan of action, there are a very remarkable gaps here. That is why I think that's the main challenges or main reason causing the less trust, less confidence on the public institutions. But then, again, the fundamental question is, in addition, or except this multilateral approach, can we imagine we retreat to the fragmentation, to the bilateral arrangement, which would be...
Or the rules of the jungle?
Well, absolutely. So that's why that I think, yes, we see the limits of the multilateral institutions, but also we have to remind ourselves, what is the viable option? Except there's a multilateral institutions, multilateralism, except the United Nations, do we find any more legitimate institution which may bring all stakeholders together to tackle the new challenges? That's something that we need to answer first.
This is World Insight, our New Year special on global governance. Despite volatility, policy shifts, and persistent geopolitical tensions, the world trade in goods and services continue to grow through the year 2025. That is according to the latest number coming from United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Today, 72% of global goods traded still operate on WTO most favored nation terms. For more on global trade and multilateralism, let's hear from my earlier conversations with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, WTO Director General, and Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UN Trade and Development. There are quite a number of myths about WTO when it comes to people's rhetoric against WTO. There are also a lot of myths about the realities of trade today in our world. How does the WTO help its members to come to realize what is the reality of trade today?
Well, we are evidence-based and we monitor. And I have to say, in a month or so ago, we were not seeing so much trade diversion. But now, if you want to call it that, but now we're seeing that. The evidence is showing us trade between China and the US is going down, and that trade is going elsewhere. Okay, but members need to look at it. And we've said to members, look at it. If you feel that something is happening with the trade, the first thing is have a dialogue with China and discuss it and see how you can manage this. The second is WTO has so many tools within its toolbox that can help members to talk to each other and manage these issues of trade. We have a lot of tools, and I think some members are using it. So that's the way to go. The WTO is a platform for dialogue. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to settle these things in an amicable way.
Right. And not let the myths spread around, but rather let the data spread around.
Let the data and the evidence show. We always go out when we're evidence-based. That's why we didn't say anything until we were looking at the data of most favored nation, how much of trade is going on, and we showed that, wow, 72% is going on.
And now in the reform, you have been talking to both your staff and to the international community about how to preserve, how to reform, and how to follow up and update the WTO system for the new trends. Among them, do you prioritize? Obviously, you cannot do all the things all at the same time. How to prioritize them?
But I think the way you put it, Tianwei, is very, very good. Because I think the first objective in my second term is to say, what is it that works? What works for the global trading system at the WTO? And there are some very important things that work that I alluded to. The fact that 72% of world trade is still on WTO terms today. How do we preserve that? The second thing is, what are the other rules within the WTO that are important we need to preserve? We have the WTO helps to set standards on human safety and product safety in trade. It builds trust. How do we preserve that? Most members value that. So secondly, we have other agreements on intellectual property protection, for instance, that are also very valued by the business community. How do we preserve that? So preserving what works. The second is to ask the question, what doesn't work? We cannot be complacent. We have many things, many challenges to fix. And that is, so the priority number one is preserving what works. Priority number two is fixing what does not work. And among that, we have issues to look at. There are several that are important. One, how we make decisions. The world is changing very, very fast. With technology advancing and AI at a fast pace. The organization needs to be more nimble, more flexible, more swift to deliver for the world. And so we have a consensus decision-making system, unanimity, which is very valuable, meaning the smallest member has the same power as the largest. But we need to make it work better. So that we can make decisions faster. So
plurilateral, for example?
That means, what that can translate into is that perhaps when there's an issue to solve, a coalition of willing members who find that issue very important can get together and decide to work on it and to come to an agreement. And other members who do not particularly want to join can let them get ahead with it. So more flexible plurilaterals and decision-making systems, that could be one.
We have seen some national security strategies from one country or another talking about, emerging economies and developing countries likely to be the battleground, so to speak, for trade and economic competition. Do you see that is really likely to happen?
Yeah, I still think, I have to say, that the world is very interdependent. And you can see that in our last Trade and Development Report. You can see, when you look at trade, that the hubs of trade in the South have doubled from before. That means that trade has been diversified, that production has disconcentrated, that there has been more inclusivity in bringing more actors and more countries into trade. So I think that this concentration is part of the resilience of trade.
But what is likely to be the role of the Global South when it comes to global trade, particularly right now when we still see a lot of vulnerabilities in terms of geopolitics and geoeconomic competition?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I would say that geopolitics has taken away a lot of the independent space of geoeconomics. So geopolitics and geoeconomics now are
ever more intertwined.
Much more intertwined. It's true, but the Global South has an important voice in WTO. So if we believe in a rules-based trade system, and if we believe that many of our countries, small and medium-sized countries, we need the framework to be able to thrive, because we cannot play the game of the big. We need a rules-based trade for predictability and for our economies to function.
Madam SG, I remember very well in some of the interviews you are suggesting we need to look at the evidence in order to give analysis. And obviously you have been showing the evidence strongly. But the question really is whether many of the others in the world, would they be able to have access to evidence, be able to see this evidence, and come to terms with this evidence of how the world has been changing? For example, about China and China's role with the rest of the world.
One of the things when I came to the UN Trade and Development Organization, I said, we have such a wealth of analysis and information in the organization. How do we make it get to all the people? Because if we do reports of 200 pages, it won't happen, yes? And we started to put a lot of graphic, easy to understand evidence out there. I think that is part of our mandate, of part of our contribution to the world. And we have the ones that have said, well, look, today the economy is different from before. Yes. 40% of GDP is Global South, 40% of trade is Global South, 50% of foreign direct investment originates in the South. So obviously the South is now a very important force of the global economy, and we have to listen more, to include more, and to empower the voices of the South if we want a multilateral system that will respond to the realities of today.
Our New Year special on global governance. In the year 2025, the global economy has been resilient and performed better than expected. The International Monetary Fund projected a 3.1% global economic growth for the year 2026, given the major transformation from geopolitics to technology. Meanwhile, the rise of the Global South is demanding ever bigger voice in global financial policies and institutions. And here are excerpts of my earlier interview with IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and Dilma Rousseff, President of the New Development Bank. The UN is now being arguably whether functioning well or not. There's also talks about other organizations such as WTO. So what does that mean for IMF? How do you think you can survive and thrive with these strong rhetorics and also increasing concerns about how global governance should be done?
First and foremost, stick to our mandate. What is our mandate? Macroeconomic and financial stability, growth, and employment. We, in a world of more uncertainty, more shocks, we are a source of stability. Our job is to build resilience to the forces that affect economies. Countries see value in the IMF because of that clear mandate and service we provide. Second, we are very disciplined. Today, the resources we spend as an institution are the same they were 20 years ago. Our membership increased. We now have 191 members. The complexity in the world have increased. But we are very focused to deliver to our members value for their participation. 3, we are the only institution on this planet that can swiftly rescue countries in trouble. Today we have 50 programs. There are 50 countries that need the IMF. Just to give you some examples from Asia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they rely on the fund to provide swiftly sizable support. And we do it with no cost to taxpayers. And that value of the fund demonstrably has been respected by all our members, rich, poor, big, small. And I think that as long as we continue to be focused on delivering macroeconomic and financial stability, growth and employment, the IMF will be cherished and respected by our members.
If you look at the world stage, there are increasing numbers of financial institutions playing their different roles. Regionally, for example, you see AIIB, you also see New Development Bank. There has been talks about the Global South Development Bank, and the list goes on. So how do you see the cooperation and apparently even competition between IMF and these institutions and to-be institutions?
The IMF has a special role among these institutions. We are the only ones that survey the economic, financial health of every nation. And as such, we are a source of information for the development banks. And two, when there is a need to rescue a nation in trouble, usually we bring together everybody. Cooperation among multilateral institutions is always important. In a world that is more fragmented, even more important. And I can say wholeheartedly that you would always see the IMF being a strong partner to institutions that work for development.
These days, the world is changing so fast, and the development of the Global South is also as well. So how do you see the New Development Bank can be up to its task for the funding of infrastructures, for example, and other causes of the Global South, Madam President?
O que é importante para o Global South hoje?
What is important for the Global South today? Obviously, infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you cannot achieve greater development. Obviously, I believe that development must always be people-centered, as President Xi Jinping so aptly puts it. But in addition to infrastructure such as ports, airports, roads, and highways, social infrastructure such as universities, schools, and, for example, something very important today, as we saw with COVID-19 hospitals, is also very important. All of these types of infrastructure are highly prioritized by NDB. Furthermore, we know today that we are in another technological and industrial era, which is the era of digitalization and artificial intelligence. That is why the issue of technological development is also very important to us. NDB can and has formed partnerships in this area. For example, we are structuring and financing a smart hospital, just as we financed hospitals here in China during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we are financing a hospital in partnership with Chinese companies. In addition to these hospitals, I am referring to another issue, namely technology parks, which are very important for countries in the Global South. And NDB is strategically located here in China. Why strategically? Because we know that today China is undoubtedly the most industrialized country, and that it has a strategic position in the Global South and also in the world in terms of technological development. So, for us, it is very important to bring this to the countries of the Global South to create this opportunity for development.
So how would you streamline these different priorities? I'm sure, Madam President, you've been thinking a lot about that.
Sem dúvida, a gente vive.
Without a doubt, we live, I'll tell you, out of the 24 hours of the day, we actually spend 30 hours thinking about it.
Então, é assim.
First, I'll tell you the diagnosis, the difficulties, then I'll tell you how to solve them.
Depois eu vou falar como resolvê-las.
We live in a financial world, that is, the so-called international financial system that was built after World War II, which today has a very perverse characteristic. A large part of the liquidity, or the amount of money in the world, goes to finance the high debts of developed countries. For example, the U.S. has a debt of around $35 to $37 trillion, and several European countries are also heavily indebted.
as elevadas dívidas dos países desenvolvidos.
Most of the money goes to these places, which makes it difficult for countries in Africa, Latin America, and poor countries in any region of the planet to access credit at decent interest rates. So, the difference between interest rates charged to developed countries and those charged to countries in the Global South is very noticeable. For countries in the Global South, interest rates are much higher. What NDB does is always seek to access the lowest possible interest rate. That's the first thing we do. We do this by seeking international funding, but also by providing financing in local currencies. This financing in local currencies can be done through swaps. For example, you can invest in a country in the Global South using a swap in Chinese currency rather than US dollars, because the interest rate is lower. And you can also finance in the country's own currency if you raise funds from that country. So, you have to use these two mechanisms to ensure that you get the lowest possible interest rate and secure financing. And obviously we are now also resorting to guarantee mechanisms, meaning that you also finance the guarantee.
And that's all the time we have for today. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us.